Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Alexey, and today I have a special guest, Jack Kosto. Jack is a metal guitarist, mixing and mastering engineer, and a songwriter, who is best known for his work with Symphonic Metal band Seven Spires. Besides being a guitarist and a sound engineer of Seven Spires, Jack does audio production for other bands. If you like the sound of Seven Spires songs and albums, you can reach out Jack on his official website and check out his portfolio in order to hire him as a mixing engineer or a mastering engineer. It's a huge honor to have you on my YouTube channel today, Jack. And let's start our interview. How you became a guitar player.
I kind of always grew up around music. Before I ever picked up a guitar, in school I had to learn viola, like classical style viola. And then I played piano a little bit before that. But what really made me fall in love with guitar was I went to a guitar clinic at a music store that they have artists come in to sell guitars and stuff. And so my local music store hosted a clinic for Dean Guitars with Michael Angelo Batio, who I had only seen through YouTube, and I was like, yeah, cool. And this was my first experience seeing like a real musician of that caliber in front of my face, 30 feet away. And I saw this dude just playing like a million miles an hour, like decked out in the metal clothes and stuff. And I was like, that's it. That's what I'm going to do forever now. I want to play that fast. I want to make, that kind of music. I want to look that cool. And, the rest is kind of history from there. And I was lucky enough to actually meet him after the show and kind of stay in touch. And he's been sort of like an unofficial mentor to me for a while. And so I learned a lot from him, and I learned a lot from other guitar players. But that was kind of the moment where I said, I really want to be a guitar player as my career.
And besides meeting him in person, have you watched his guitar school videos? Because he has like very educational guitar school videos from the 90s, like Speed Kills, something like that. He's a very phenomenal, not only about his own playing style, but also he's also very phenomenal about as a teacher,
Yeah, absolutely agreed. I've seen all those DVDs as well and practiced them a lot. And a lot of people notice also that's how I learned how to pick fast, technique wise. So my hand position is similar to his on the body of the guitar. And so people kind of pick up on that a little bit. And I practiced all those exercises, and that's really kind of where the foundation of my speed technique came from, is those DVDs. They're great. I recommend them to anybody, who's trying to learn how to play fast in a serious way and not injure themselves in the process.
How Seven Spires was created?
Yeah, Adrienne and I met at actually the bookstore of the Berklee College of Music in Boston. I'd been there for about a year, and she was starting her first semester, and we were in line to check out with our textbooks for the semester, and I noticed that there's this rock looking girl wearing a Nightwish shirt, and we kind of clocked each other as metalheads, and got to talking a little bit. I was like, yeah, I'm a guitar player. She said she's a singer and looking to start a project of some kind. So I waited for her outside the store, and she gave me her contact info. And I think what happened was I made the mistake of saying, if you ever get your band together, give me a call. And she took that as a challenge and, got kind of a lineup together and invited me, and we started rehearsing. And from there, she was already been a songwriter for years and years and years, and had this concept for a band and a sound. And it turned out that we actually had great songwriting chemistry together as well. So the rest is history. We went through a few initial lineups with different people until we found, kind of something that really worked for about 10 years. And recently we had a change with the drummer, but that was kind of the point where we found that lineup where it was like, okay, this is a serious thing now, and we could really go far with this. So that was it. A magical little, Def Leppard playing on the radio moment in the bookstore in college.
My next question is how Seven Spires got a deal with Frontier's music label. And in this case, can you please be a little bit more specific, like maybe start from the very beginning? Because I'm very interested to know, for instance, what kind of music, what kind of music quality you should prepare for the label, how many songs you should prepare for the label, how to get a deal with such a big metal label, and how to prepare your band for getting such a great deal.
Okay, great. Yeah, this is a huge topic, and I could talk for a very long time on this. And I also want to say that the only thing that I can answer this question from is my own experience. And I think with labels and bands nowadays, not only does the industry change so fast, trend-wise, and what works and what doesn't, I think there's also not one size fits all for, what worked for us is not necessarily going to work for another band. So I'll start talking and just take what I say with a grain of salt, because it might not be that you can take what we did and do it and get the same results. It really depends. But how it kind of worked for us is the introduction to the label was actually made through our mixing mastering engineer for the first 3 records, who is Sasha Paeth. And if you're not familiar with him, he's the guitar player for Avantasia, and he used to play in Heaven's Gate, and he's also like kind of the producer who made the European power metal scene, and was responsible for so many records like Kamelot, Epica, Angra, just huge bands. And I feel like he's actually one of the most underrated producers and songwriters in the industry. Like it's really a tragedy, and an amazing guitar player too. And Sasha has been there. We actually cold emailed him for our first EP that we made as a local band to mix our record, and he responded and was like, yeah, I'll do it. And the rest is history. We worked with him for a long time, and Adrienne still works with him in other projects. But that's how we were introduced specifically to Frontiers as a label. And I think many great relationships within the industry come from that kind of word of mouth. Every label gets solicited, 100 emails a day from bands. Can we get a record deal? And I've found the most successful ones come from that word of mouth. But I think what made us interesting to the label, and that they entertained our offer, was kind of what you said. Like, we, by that point, had some self-booked touring experience. We had a record out that was doing relatively well. We released it through another distribution company that did similar things to what a label would do. So we had a record out, we had an image, we had good songs, and it was sort of showcasing that we were able to kind of be the whole package. And I think labels are looking for that nowadays. They're looking for a band that has great songs, has a look, does everything themselves, that a label can just distribute. Whereas, like, when you think of a label from back in the day, at least, from before I was born, you think of a guy going into a club and seeing this band on stage just like going crazy and like they're going to be the next big thing, and they call up the guy with the cigar sitting at the desk and like give them $1 million, send them to the studio, and then and the label's responsible for breaking these bands into the public eye and investing and growing this artist to based on the potential that they see. And I think it's sort of the other way around nowadays, where artists are responsible for creating their own potential and doing everything themselves. And then a label will, maybe give some money to that, or help with the distribution side of things. But that's kind of, I think, what's the important part for maybe a young band who's looking to get a record deal, or to take that next step from like good local band into national or international label territory is to, like, you really have to wear all the hats yourself and have, it's never going to be perfect, and your recording of yourself is never going to be perfect as if you were working with a Jens Bogren or a Jacob Hansen or someone like that. But if you can get to a certain standard and where it feels professional and sounds in a way that doesn't turn people off or confuse people, I think that makes you attractive to the modern label that's managing 1,000 artists and is looking to not have to be so hands-on with their bands anymore. Again, only my opinion, and it depends on a lot of things, but that's what was the case for us. Like we're grinding on the local scene for ages. We put out our own record. We hired our own mixing engineer at the time who got us, the most professional sound possible. We hired someone to do our music videos, and we were managing and doing the whole thing ourselves.
And in addition to this question, in general sense, who is responsible for a band's success? Like in this case, by success, I mean a deal with a label again. And who is responsible for a band's success? Is it all about your professional sound engineer? Because he's professional, and Sasha is a professional sound engineer, and I know him not personally, but I know him from different bands, because back in the days I was listening to Avantasia, Rhapsody of Fire, Epica, Kamelot, and he produced some of the albums, back in the days for huge power metal and symphonic metal bands. And in this case, yes, you are pretty lucky to have Sasha on your team as a producer and sound engineer. But again, what is the main, source of success? Like, is it all about your music? Is it all about your creativity, or is it all about your professional sound? What makes you attractive for a label after all?
That's another great question. And I think it's another situation where it's kind of all of the above. And if one link in the chain is weak, it can kind of mess up the whole thing. Yes, you have to have, first and foremost, as the foundation, you have to have a great song, a great, or great songs, a great album. The product, the art has to be there. And with that foundation, I think you have to present it up to a certain standard of audio quality nowadays. And whether that's doing it yourself or hiring a producer to mix and to master, listeners and labels are expecting within that first 10 seconds to be, hear something that sounds great. And if you're not up to that standard, it's more likely that they're going to turn it off and move on to the next thing. Not 100% of the time. There are some people out there that are like, really in tune with the artistic side of things, and they're able to hear past that production quality maybe not being so good, but here, that's a great song. And I love that artistically. But it makes it more difficult. And the label side of it as well, it's the same thing where if you don't have the product in order, and if they're not making an effort to push it, it just makes it harder to find your audience and get connected with your audience. Like if a label is making sure that you're in the record stores, making sure you're on the streaming services, helping you get playlisted, on Spotify or on Apple Music or all of these things, it only makes it easier to get noticed. It's kind of hard to make sure I'm connecting all of the parts of the question here, because it's right now it's such a complex machine of ad revenue and ad targeting on Google, and how your playlist appears on Spotify, and then your mastering being not too quiet or not too blown out on a particular streaming service. And like, it's really complex right now. And I understand why there are so many questions about this, because it is very overwhelming to think about all of it. And I think because of that we've actually been doing this for a while now, and we've kind of got a team of people that are handling all these individual things, it makes it possible to continue to do it. Like if it was just me, or if it was just the four of us trying to manage all of these things, I think we would burn out, and we have burnt out, and had to take some time off and move back from things. So it's, I think the only reliable way to be attractive to labels and to have consistent success and reliable success is to either do it all yourself or make sure that you have a team of people that you can trust that can cover all of those bases and all of those things. And it's not something you can build overnight unless you get a record deal with a huge label that has those kind of teams built in. And that's one of the things that keeps labels so attractive right now, is like, if a band is doing pretty good on their own and they get signed by, Sony or Warner or these big things, those labels have a roster of employees and teams of people that are managing only social media and only streaming and these things. And I'm not sure exactly how every single label is doing it, but you can get hooked into a system that already works and that's tuned into these things, and that's an attractive part of that nowadays.
How you became a sound engineer?
A little out of necessity. It actually came from my journey as a guitar player, and really being obsessive about my guitar tone, my gear and pickups and amps and all that. And then when we started to record music, it was like, okay, I want to sound good on the albums. I want people to, I want to like my sound. I want other people to like it. How do I do that? So I got into the recording side of things, and how to mic an amp, what speakers to use. And all of that boiled down to the realization that nobody cares how my guitar sounds if the rest of the thing doesn't sound good. The whole song has to sound good, and most people are going to listen to the vocals and maybe the drums. So I got to figure out how to make those sound good so that my guitar can sound good. And from there, like that necessity, I kind of fell in love with it, and both the technical side and the artistic aspects of recording and production and mixing. And through being interested in that more, it just kind of grew, and I felt like I had an ear for it and a knack for it. And it really balances out what I love about being a guitar player and playing live and writing songs and stuff. It's such a different thing, but in the same creative field. So I feel like I can do both in my life during different times, and really enjoy and stay fresh and love both things. So that's how I got into it, and that's why I stay into it.
What kind of skills and knowledge you should have about sound engineering so it will allow your band to get a deal with a big metal label?
If I go back to the first part of that question, what skills do you need to have? I think if you're someone like me that learns to do the whole thing, learns to record, learns to performance produce, and get into mixing and mastering, you do have to do that at a very high level to be, to attract those labels and to attract an audience and stuff, because it's so easy nowadays with, plug-in presets and Kempers and, plugins that you can buy to get amazing sounds. Whereas, back in the 90s or something like that, you would have to go into an expensive studio and hire a great producer to get great sounds. There was just no getting around that. And now there kind of is. You can get a really decent result at home with a laptop, if you know what you're doing. So I think every musician, every serious musician in a band that's trying to make original music should have some recording knowledge of their own instrument, and kind of know what they like and know how they like to be represented. And if you aren't into that, or if you don't want to get into more than that, I think hiring a producer, like someone to not only record, but to mix and master, is probably one of the best investments you can make, because a producer will come in and have a vision for the end result, and not just, take your tracks and polish them up and, throw it out into the world. And we're very lucky to have picked someone like Sasha, for instance, because we were recording by ourselves at home, thankfully all music students. So we had, some idea of how to work software and laptops and stuff, but we made so many mistakes, and Sasha really saved our asses on those early recordings, using Superior Drummer and, not really knowing what it takes to tune a guitar regularly versus continue to tune it in the studio, and how meticulous you need to be, for a modern sounding metal record. And like there were just things we didn't know, and with each subsequent record we would make improvements and get closer to things that sounded great when we sent them off. So there was less heavy lifting that needed to be done, and from there, that actually, like, every time I learned more with the recording, and then I would send those tracks out and I would get something back and I would start to think, I would have done that differently, or like, that's not what I had in mind when I recorded this sound. And that's sort of how I made the switch, is when I had enough experience in the skill set to where I was hearing things a certain way and hearing things differently and wanting them to be different. And I realized I couldn't call Sasha up with a note of, a million notes of like, the kick needs to sound like this, and can you duck 1K on the backing vocals here, and like this needs to sound round and big and not thin. It's like, I would drive him up the wall, and it's a disservice to his tastes as a producer. So that, with the recent record, I was like, I'm not going to be happy unless I do this. And even if it comes out not as good or something like that, I have to be the one to do this album. And it came out great, and I'm really happy. I spent a lot of time, a lot of hard work. But to sum up all of that and the whole journey, I think you either need to force yourself to get interested in that to some degree to deliver a quality result and not expect someone to come in and save you, or knuckle down and like pay someone to do it for you and know that you're going to get a fantastic result from that. And it's going to seem expensive. It's, I know money is a tough thing for young bands and growing bands and stuff like that, but if you want to have a real chance at like commercial success, at least in metal or something, like, for, as much as you can be commercially successful in metal, there are places like that investing money will return much more than the cost for you. And I think that's one of them. A great producer you'll pay a lot of money and you'll get a result that's 4 times worth what you paid.
And in addition to this question, what is your opinion on getting an education on sound engineering nowadays? Like, should you go to a institute or music college, or should you get your education online by learning from online academies like Produce Like a Pro, Mix with the Masters, or URM Academy?
Great question. I think my opinion on it is the same as my opinion of going to school as a musician, which I did. I have a degree in performance from Berklee. You can see, I don't know if you can see it in the shot, but right above the light switch is my very expensive piece of paper that says I can play guitar good. So for me, very early on, I knew, like, especially here in America, it's like, go to college, and that will let you have a good life. And whether that's necessarily true or not, I don't know. But I felt like I wanted to do that. And I don't regret doing it, but it was a different experience than what I thought it was going to be. I assumed I would show up to college as a musician, and everybody would be like me, like super driven and like wanting to make the best possible career of it, and like really taking advantage of soaking up all this information, being around hungry people that loved art and loved music. And I found that it was a lot more similar to everywhere else, where there were a lot of party people and there were a lot of people that skipped class, and it was really weird to me, like kind of shocking. And so I think school for that and for sound engineering is probably the same thing. There's so much good information, there's so many good teachers, there's so many good ways to learn, and what you get out of it is going to be what you put into it. If you go to somewhere like that and you want that experience of going to classes every day and studying and really working hard to absorb all that information, you're going to get a lot out of it, and you're going to be happy. But if you go because you think you have to, you're going to be bummed out and probably waste your money. So in that case, it would be a lot better to learn online. Even you have to be a little careful with free content on YouTube nowadays, because there's some pretty bad advice out there. But I subscribe to URM and Nail the Mix. I love their stuff. I've been watching Produce Like a Pro for ages. I love Mix with the Masters. So while I have a formal education for guitar and for music itself, and I don't have a formal education for sound engineering, I'm all self-taught and learned online and stuff like that. And I think the really important part is that you graduate from those kind of online services or from your formal education and get real life experience making records. There's nothing that any of those services can teach you that is going to be more valuable than recording and putting out your first record. Like, that's going to change so much of your perspective on the process. And you can only hear about that from another source so much. Like I think that after doing 3-4 records with my own band and mixing records for other bands, that like now I consider myself to have some actual opinions that are worth something. And I think a lot of people don't think of that. They produce their own music and maybe don't get the same real world kind of experience.
How do you create a guitar tone for Seven Spires songs? What do you use for tracking guitars? And what is your approach on mixing guitars for Seven Spires songs?
Ooh, blood, sweat, and tears.
As always.
Yeah. I've always, for Spires, I've always kind of liked the same things, and for my own sound, my own playing, and my tastes kind of developed alongside the band and the music and stuff. So I've always really liked. Where do I start? I guess I start with the guitars. I'm lucky enough to have my own signature guitar now with a company called Blackheart Guitarists. They're a small USA custom shop company, and so I've designed with them this kind of modern-ish take on like a traditional double cut, soloist style, like Jackson or ESP guitar. And it's nothing crazy. It's like, Floyd Rose, Fishman pickups, normal stuff. So I'm playing nothing any really different than you could get off of the shelf, except this is like a no expense spared version of that's designed with me that I really love. So guitar is very important. Playing is super important. Tuning is super important. If there's anything that I see more, that I get tracks in that are, really hard to work with, it's not paying attention to tuning and intonation, especially in rhythm guitars, because you can't fix that. So my number one piece of advice is like, be insane about tuning and you'll be so happy. But so I go for my guitar, and then for rhythm guitars in a band like Seven Spires, you're competing with, like extremely fast drums or extremely big, verby, organic drums. It's the challenge of all metal music at the moment, is like everything has to sound massive but still be clear. So you're competing with that, a bass player who wants every note to be heard all the time, rightfully so, full orchestra, and then you still have to have vocals on top of that. So the sound needs to be to feel big but be controlled at the same time. And for this, I've always liked a Mesa dual rectifier amp. Into boosted with the tube screamer because you have to kind of like shape the high, cut some of the extreme lows and the extreme highs and focus the distortion more in the mids. And the cabinets almost always Mesa oversized with the vintage 30 from a good year. And you always are going to need some EQ to kind of tame things to fit with the orchestra, and that careful balance of not over EQing both the rhythm guitars and the orchestra is make or break, I think, in this kind of music, because you don't want to sacrifice one for the other all the time. Rhythm guitars, Mesa rectifier has a distortion that I like, and miking the speaker in a way that works in the music without too much EQ is very important. And for lead guitars, like solo guitars, I go in the total opposite direction, different amp, different cab, different mic setup. And I really like a Marshall JCM series for that, 800, 900. On the latest album, I used 800. Also hit with the tube screamer, extremely mid-rangey sound, whereas the Mesa is like very scooped, heavy in the lows, heavy in the highs. And then the Marshall is the opposite. It's like a frowny face and so much of that like vocal mid-range. And I think that works really well, both to cut through the orchestra and the noise and stuff, and also to sit similarly to where Adrienne's vocal sits. Like I've been playing lead guitars and playing guitar as with her for 10 or 12 years now, and I think my lead sound has developed alongside her vocal range so that they kind of work in similar ways. And I almost try to match my vibrato to the way she sings sometimes. So yeah, was that a detailed enough answer on the recording setup? It's like nothing too weird, guitar, pedal, amp, cab, mic it right, try not to kill it with EQ. Um, yeah, get it right in the recording at first. Try not to like record the tone, dial the tone, and mic up the cab in context with the song. Because if you're just listening to guitars, it's always going to be darker and muddier and bigger than you need it to be. So try and dial the tone in context with the music, and then you shouldn't need to do that much if the performance is good. Um, Maybe use less gain than you think you need, because the more guitars you stack, the more they kind of pick up distortion from each other. But 95% of the battle in getting a great guitar sound is going to be the speaker and microphone combination, and making sure that you get that right. Then you can pretty much run any head into that cabinet.
How do you create a bass tone for Seven Spires? What do you use for tracking bass? And again, what is your approach on mixing bass for Seven Spires?
Get a great bass player with a great bass, and it's not that tricky. No, yeah, our bass player Peter is such a high caliber musician and so meticulous about his own playing that it's actually very difficult to make him sound bad. So like there are so many ways of doing bass, and for the records that I didn't mix, it was pretty much like, track a good DI with good playing, try to get an amp sound that I think works, but assume that Sasha will probably reamp or, use a Sans amp or software or something like that. So I can't speak to those, but when I record bass and for something like Spires, I really like an actual amp sound, whether it's a software amp or a real amp. I like the way that like an Ampeg rig with a speaker cabinet filters the sound and kind of creates this like growl in the low end and the amp thing. I'm not a huge fan of just taking the DI and splitting it and like using the clean low end and distorting the shit out of the high end from the DI. Like I like that kind of like rock and roll thing that a bass amplifier would do. And for Pete, it's probably some kind of distortion pedal in front of that amp blended in, like a dark glass pedal that's kind of the standard nowadays. And depending on the section, Pete does a lot of tapping, like really intricate, fast bass tapping as well. And for those parts, I like to blend in a distortion in parallel from the DI, like maybe a Sans amp or a plugin or something like that, that is focused very much in the mid range, that will only turn on for those tapping parts, so that it boosts the level of those and boosts the audibility of it without also adding to the sub low end. So it doesn't overwhelm the whole mix with extra low end when he starts doing those like solo bass parts. But you get that boost just like a guitar solo would be boosted or something like that. So that's kind of it. Like with bass more so than guitar, the bass itself and the playing, I think, take care of so much of it. Like you could do a lot to a great bass sound, a lot of different things, like a well recorded bass DI, and get a lot of different but equally good results. But that's just how I like to do it. I like to hear the amp, and I like to hear that kind of growl in a rock and roll, like kind of live band way, even in a metal.
And when it comes to mixing bass, you already said that you are not a fan of splitting bass into parts, like using DI high, DI low. But in this case, do you use something like parallax?
I think actually on the most recent album, A Fortress Called Home, the tapping distortion was parallax. Great plugin. And I'm not saying I never do the DI split thing. Like one cool trick actually from the producer Jens Bogren that I stole. I steal a lot of things from him. He's probably my favorite engineer out there now, so I have the amp sound that's like the main core of the sound. But sometimes I'll take the DI and filter out like all of the low end and all of the mid range and just keep maybe everything above 4 or 5K. So you just get the string and the fret noise from the bass DI, and you can blend that into the amp, and it sort of like, revitalizes the bass sound a bit. And also, depending on the playing and depending on the bass itself, you can get the same thing where the amp doesn't have a consistent low end in the way that you need. So then I could split the DI and only use the sub frequencies from the DI to stabilize the low end of the bass amp sound. So I would use splitting in that way, of either adding only high end or only sub frequencies to the bass sound, or only distortion in the mid range for things like tapping or breaks or something like that. So I do that, but I don't do that as the main sound.
What is your approach on tracking drums for Seven Spires songs?
Get a ridiculously good drummer and fresh heads and a great kit, and just hope that it works. It's changed a lot over the years. The two albums that I tracked the drums for are Gods of Debauchery and the most recent album, A Fortress Called Home. And both of these were kind of the goal for me, at least, and especially with the most recent one, is to keep as much of the natural drums as possible, which is super tricky when you're playing, blast beats and really fast stuff, and like trying to compete with super extreme modern metal and also things like jazz, and like trying to balance the sound of a great drummer on his kit into a metal mix with a full orchestra and wall of guitars and crazy, squealy vocal noises. And so really my approach is not anything different to what you'll hear from anyone. Like if you have, a great drummer playing in time, tune the kit well with fresh heads, make sure the kit sounds good in the room you're recording in, and record, enough microphones that, your close mics, and record some room mics and overheads and stuff like that. Really, there's so many, every single person, every single producer has a different way of miking and recording and mixing a drum kit. And those are really the consistent important things, is the tuning of the kit itself, fresh heads, and a great drummer.
How do you create orchestral elements for Seven Spires songs?
That is all Adrienne. She is a genius when it comes to these things. And like, she's so well known as a singer, in all these bands and in Spires and on the internet all over the place. But she's a great piano player and also a great orchestrator. And part of her degree from school actually is in orchestration. So she's the one doing all the orchestral arrangements, and is really hands-on with the sounds and very specific with the patches and the MIDI and stuff. Every once in a while we try to use, real element. Pete, our bass player, also plays upright, classical bass. And so we record that sometimes. We've hired live violinists and stuff, but the majority of the orchestra sound is MIDI, like programmed, and it's all Adrienne doing that. What she sends me normally doesn't need that much, some EQing and automation just to get the levels right. If you need a French horn part to sound angry, distort it a little bit. And but really the goal is to do as little to what she sends as possible, because she's so specific about what she wants to hear. And it's done so intentionally with the rest of the arrangement as well, that that's actually weirdly one of the easier parts of working with Spires, is like, you just kind of pull the faders up and it's like, oh yeah, the orchestra sounds great, slaughtering everything else to make that stay, out of the way.
And in this case, what tips can you give on mixing orchestral elements for Seven Spires songs?
An orchestra is something that people have been hearing and recording, and maybe not recording for that long, but they've had a lot of time to figure out how to make that sound good as a system, put them in a hall in a certain way, rehearse all together. The instruments themselves, hundreds of years of building technique to make those instruments project well and sound good. So most sound libraries that you get today, if you're programming stuff, are going to sound pretty good. And I think the more you do to them, the more likely you are to mess that up. So I think what the best advice I can give is either if you're doing the arrangements or you're hiring someone, do those arrangements in context with what the full song is going to be. Make sure that they know what the guitars are going to be doing, what the drums are going to be playing, so that the orchestra can balance those elements out. And you don't get into a situation where the orchestra is doing too much, or, isn't able to come through in a way. So you have to filter it and push it into the background and just use it as ambience. Like if you want a really full orchestra sound and a really big sounding orchestra in a metal context, you have to be mindful of the rest of the arrangement and what it's going to be competing with. And then it's a matter of blood, sweat, and tears, like EQing out boxiness or frequencies that you don't need lightly to not, ruin the character of the sound. Like something like a viola can sound honky and nasal and boxy and really weird. But if you take too much of that out, then you lose what makes that instrument interesting. it's sort of the same thing with vocals and with any acoustic instrument as well. Is like we have a built up sense of what those instruments sound like in reality with, if you hear it in front of you acoustically in a room. And if you process something like that in a recording too much to where it doesn't sound believable to your brain, it can really throw you off and sound very bizarre. So like, you want to try to do as little as possible while still making room for the metal band to be big. Yeah. So that's my advice is again, like it's the boring answer is make sure it sounds good before you start doing anything other than moving the fader.
What do you use for tracking Adrienne's vocals for Seven Spires songs?
Yeah, another boring answer. She just sounds like that. There's nothing I can do to ruin her. For many years, it was an SM7B into an interface and sent off. Little bit of light vocal tuning because I think so much of the really extreme stuff that she's doing is pretty taxing on the voice. So it's important to record a singer like her that's just, dripping with mojo and vibe when she sings to get the character of the performance right. And then use something like pitch correction to just nudge the notes into place a little bit. Because if you're trying to get character and tuning at the same time and you do 8 takes instead of 2 or 3, you can wear out her voice for the rest of the day. Because like she has a very awesome grasp on technique and what's healthy and what's not. And I sometimes will suggest that she does stuff worse and bad for her voice so that it sounds cooler. Like whispery screams and just technical things that aren't perfect, but to get the right emotional vibe. And we love this, but it can also really do, tax the voice a lot. So I think that's an important thing. And then once the performance part of it is right, it's been an SM7B for so long. And on the recent record, I used the UAD modeling mic, the big Townsend Labs one. But it's really kind of like microphone and probably recording with some compression and go to town. The rest is dependent on the song. And don't be afraid. I guess the other tip I have, if there's any kind of tip, is don't be afraid to really heavily compress a singer, because the dynamics, the way the dynamics are presented in modern music is like the vocals are going to need to be compressed to be upfront in your face anyway. And your perception of how good the take is can really change depending on whether you're hearing that like it's supposed to be or whether you're struggling to hear the quiet notes. So I really like to lean into something like an LA2A or like maybe a distressor for screams that has some distortion in it to get the vocals kind of close to what they're going to sound like in the mix, purely so that you can judge the performance properly. And then whatever you need to do, depending on the song, as far as reverb or EQ or de-essing or something like that, is going to be, done later and really obvious and easy to take care of. So that's what I think the advice is like, unfortunately, she just sounds like that. It's my job to not ruin it. And a microphone is important for for recording that.
What tips can you give on mixing Adrienne's vocals for Seven Spires songs? And in this case, can you please tell me what do you do about mixing her extreme vocals?
Sort of what I said before is like, it's my job to not ruin it. She's going to slay the performance and it's going to be absolutely awesome. Then my job is to basically, get rid of any of the natural like proximity effect from the microphone and like try to thin things out without it sounding thin. and delivering the attitude, like enhancing the attitude of what she's performing and what she's saying with things like EQ or compression or distortion or delay and reverb. And typically the clean vocals get less compression and distortion than the screams, but it's not like you're distorting the screams to get the sound. It's sort of to get evenness, and the harmonic content from distortion or a distorting compressor, like a tube compressor or something like that, will make you make your EQ moves more effective, and you won't have to use as much EQ. Like you can get a really bright, in your face, very present vocal almost with no top end boost at all by using the right kind of compression, or saturation. And so that's sort of where I lean, is to get the majority of the sound from the compressor or the preamp or the microphone, and the distortion, both with clean and extreme vocals. And just the extreme vocals can handle more, and less EQ, as little reverb as possible. And I try to use more delays for the ambience, and then automation to make sure that the lyrics are presented in the right way, and you don't lose consonants or syllables and stuff like that.
Is it possible to promote your music and become successful as a band, as a metal band, without a label nowadays?
Yeah, I think so. There's evidence of this. Bands like Periphery are independent nowadays, or Intervals, I think, is another one, that's been independent for a long time. Even a band like Opeth is on their own label that they created. So I think it's absolutely possible. I think it's easier for a band that is already well known to go independent and be very successful at it than for a new band to start and stay independent, and get noticed that way. Like I think that's incredibly difficult, and you have to be very spot on with your marketing sense and how much content you're creating and your social media presence and all that. I think it's probably one of the hardest things to get right in the world if you want to go that way. Like you just have to know so much about so many fields to be a new band or a young band, independent, and really make it big. But I don't think it's impossible at all.
And my final question is, when it comes to Spotify streams, who's responsible for a band's success? Musicians, a label, or a sound engineer?
All of the above. Like I said before, like you, as the musician, as the band, you have to write a great song and you have to play it well on the record. Your sound engineer is going to take that and hype it and present it, hopefully in a way that matches what your intention was, but so that an audience will digest it, and enjoy it in the way that you're supposed to. And so it competes with other things that are out there. And then a label, or, maybe not necessarily the label, but the team of people around the label will be responsible for all the distribution and post-distribution marketing, that is unfortunately extremely important nowadays. I think if I'm to say the quiet part out loud, most of what makes you successful and well known and well seen nowadays is how much money you make for people who run the websites that stream the songs. If you need to be in a position to make Spotify money and to make YouTube money, if the people that own those sites aren't making money off of you, you're probably not going to have success either. And that's an unfortunate thing, but it's the reality of what you have to deal with nowadays. So, and I think all three elements that you mentioned are important for getting and keeping people's attention so that they experience the advertisements in between the songs that are hopefully yours.
Thank you so much, Jack, for such a knowledgeable, educational, and very inspiring interview. It was a huge pleasure talking to you, and I really like your band, Seven Spires. You are making great music, and I wish you all the success in this work. And of course, I really like your sound as a sound engineer because you're creating such a wonderful and phenomenal sound for Seven Spires songs. And again, I wish you all the success as a sound engineer in this world so you can work with big bands like Metallica or Iron Maiden one day. Thank you so much for such a great interview.
Thank you as well. Thank you for great questions and for your time. And I hope for the same things.